Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Psychedelic Roundtable on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day, whether it's the end of your week or it's the beginning of your week. I once heard a story that said the difference between the Christians and the Jews are that for one group, the Sabbath is on Saturday, and one group, the Sabbath is on Sunday, and that's why the Jews are always one up on the Christians because they like to do the work and then take the weekend, and some people like to take the weekend and then do the work. So, regardless, it's welcome, Ben. Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, thank you, brother. Nice to be here on just a two-person roundtable at this point. I'm sure the stragglers will come on in, huh?
Yeah, I think so, man. I think so. I had this idea yesterday. I had a pretty big trip this weekend, and I took about a quarter of these. I think they were Liberty caps of some sort, as I was talking to you earlier. And I've been thinking a lot about how to integrate the psychedelic experience. And in this experience, you know, it seems to me it's not debatable that there's a heightened sense of awareness when you're on some sort of psychedelic trip. And I think you're taking in more information there. And I've been playing with that idea, but on this particular trip, I came to this conclusion, and I'm curious to what you think. And anybody who's listening in the audience, please put in the comments what you think about this. I think that the next evolution of speech, the next evolution of communication is being able to see people's intention, like being able to understand what it is they want when they walk up to you, being able to physically notice it. I don't know that you see it with your eyes. Maybe you take in information through your senses, but you can understand what people's intentions are when they approach you. What do you think about that?
Well, if you had caught me years ago, I would have kind of chuckled and laughed at that, I think. But after, some especially recent experiences, I would say it's much more than even intent. You develop a sense, and it's a cumulative sense is kind of the best I could describe it. And it's probably has something to do with the not just greater sensory information that you're perceiving, but also the rate of processing that's happening. Because the interconnection of those different regions of the brain all of a sudden kicks off, and as you know, just all you're a million miles a minute, and you're just like, wow, and everything actually makes sense. It's not like you're just losing control or losing your mind. It's actually like things are just slotting into place that fast. And so I think that probably is where that stems from and kind of where it emanates from.
Yeah, it's like after I think I had that idea because throughout the week I had had all these different situations happen to me where, people were coming up to me and I'm like, I wonder what, and it took me time to process, but people would come up to me and they would be standing next to me and I would just get this weird vibe from them. And then, it just dawned on me that I think that this person is wanting to be close to me for these specific reasons. And it's interesting to think about. But, when I look back and I listen to some different lectures of people that were talking about psychedelics, or, I think specifically about, I think it was Terence McKenna who was talking about Philo Judaeus, who said that the logos will be a more of the reemergence of the logos will be a language to be beheld, that you will, you'll behold the language. And for so long, I believed that was some way of seeing the words or seeing a language. But now that I really begin to think about it and process it, I think intent itself is kind of like a language. And if it is like you say, if it's a faster processing speed, then you would be able to thoroughly understand what someone's intention is if you can take in more information from the environment. If you can take in more information from that person, then you should get a better view of what their intent on their situation is. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's other factors to that too. I think it's also, you're creating a greater, basically, information density well around you. almost, similar to how, we have a gravity well around Earth that allows us to maintain the moon, right? And or grab passing objects like asteroids and turn them into meteors. And I think there's an aspect of that, as above, so below, right?
Yeah.
But there's an aspect of that when all of this is engaged as well, because, you'll see certain people gravitate towards you. And it's the people that need to gravitate towards you, that want to gravitate towards you, that are going to fulfill some sort of, whatever your intent is that day and what you're up to. It kind of, it's almost like this gravity well that forms around one as they walk through these integrated journeys, in my experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've been playing with this model for quite some time, that you can understand yourself by understanding your environment. The as above, so below model that we mentioned so much on this podcast. And it just, maybe it is the idea that you find what you're looking for, regardless of that unconscious bias or whatever. But it just seems like there's so many examples, and maybe it's because we've been talking about it so much.
Yeah, I'm pretty good with biases. I've been pretty skeptical of this whole thing, really.
Yeah.
I like we've talked about a bit. I come from more of a science technical background and very much, logic, step oriented systems. I think in models and all of this stuff. And so, to throw these things in there, it's like, you're breaking the system, you're breaking the model. Well, then, but this is a real experience. And then all of a sudden you have shared experiences, and then you have similar experiences with other people like yourself and me that we just meet. And then you go, okay, well, once you start to see all the smoke, there has to be some fire somewhere. I don't know where it is quite yet, but I'm getting close to it, right?
Yeah, I had I want to get your take on this. I have a really good friend that him and I, he's like the only other person in my community that I know that does like large doses, and he would do 10s, 14s, and I'm gonna get him on the podcast. But I want everyone to hear this guy's story because it's fascinating. I'll try to give it a primer, and then I'll give you some background to it and see what everybody thinks. So we had split it was a Friday night, and we were each gonna do. I did 8 grams of the albino penis envies, and he did 10. And I remember I texted him right before because we had both gotten home, and I'm like, "All right, brother, I'll see you on the other side," And I did mine, and I woke up the next day, and I felt pretty good. I had a great trip. They were really strong. And later that night, I got a phone call from a mutual friend that said, "Hey, your boy had a heart attack last night. He's in the hospital." And I was blown away because first off, I love the guy. He's a great person. And to think that he had a heart attack, it blew my mind. And then I started thinking, like, dude, I just texted that guy before I did a mushroom trip. I'll see you on the other side. Like, what the fuck? That's so crazy. Like, what are the chances of that? And so it turns out he woke up, or, I don't think he really slept that night because it's a pretty big dose. And maybe he fell back asleep, and in the morning he woke up and he ended up, he got out of bed with his wife and just fell over and was having a heart attack. His wife gave him CPR.
Wow.
They saved his life. He went into the hospital, and they induced him in a coma for 6 days. They kept him in a coma so that they wanted to figure out everything. They sedated him super heavy, and so this was a very big ordeal and life-changing for him, and a lot of things happened along the way. And I finally got to see him face to face for the first time yesterday, and I was, it was real surreal. And I was asking him about, what exactly can you tell me? Share with me what had happened. And he tells me that he goes, George, this is going to sound crazy, but I think it was the mushrooms that saved my life. And I'm like, how do you figure, man? You don't think it was the mushrooms that killed you? And he goes, no, because they don't know what stopped my heart. It was cardiac arrest. My heart stopped. I died. I was dead off and on this guy was dead for 44 minutes off and on. They shocked him like 10 different times. And when they finally got him to the hospital, the machine was keeping him alive, and they were preparing his family. They were like, look, to be honest with you, the family, people really don't come out of this. He's been off and on, in and out of life. The machine's breathing for him. It's not looking good. And if he does come back, he's probably going to have severe brain damage because, you know, the oxygen hasn't been getting to his brain. And long story longer, he came to, you know, and when I was talking to him, he said that he goes, you know, George, it's true. He goes, I can't even understand why I'm here, and I'm having a tough time understanding why me. But while I don't know if I was dead or I was alive, but I saw these jokers, like the same kind of jokers you would see on the pack of a playing cards. And they were sitting in front of me and they were throwing stuff at me and laughing at me and like rearranging stuff in my head. He's like, dude, it was the scariest thing I've ever seen. And then he talked, yeah, like, you know, and it's everything that you've heard before about a DMT trip in some aspect, you know what I mean? Or something you've read in like a shamanic trip.
Right. Well, but supposedly as you're dying, right, we release massive amounts of DMT.
Yeah.
So that would line up pretty well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. And then I started, you know, when he told me, I think that maybe the mushrooms had something to do with keeping me from having brain damage. There's a lot of literature that talks about how the neurogenesis happens and how you're, you know, in the height of a mushroom trip, you're having all this interconnectivity. And it would make sense. I'm not saying this is true, but it would make sense if that your brain lacking oxygen or your brain getting cut off under the influence of mushrooms, it may be helpful to have those connections moving back and forth, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I think this just becomes a numbers game at that point, because as you're going into those states, you know, you're obviously going to be losing certain connections, and
right,
and different neurons are going to die and whatnot. But if you have an abundance of these novel connections that happen during this trip, that, you know, it takes some of those remain for very long periods of time. Others wear off pretty relatively fast, but it still takes time for them to wear off, right? So you have all of these novel brain connections, and now, you know, the atrophy that's happening in that time period is going to be less on an overall effect because it's taking away at a greater number. It's, you know, it's starting with a greater number of connections, and so you're going to end up with a greater number of connections at the end of the experience. So you know, from just a purely physical way, you know, physical phenomena, I could see how that would work mechanistically.
Yeah, and I was thinking on, you know, from what I've read, and obviously I'm not a scientist or I'm not a doctor anyways, but from what I've read, you know, when you take large amounts of psilocybin or psychedelics, it affects the default mode network, right? And if you think of the default mode network as like this box that turns everything on, if you shut off the energy to that box, you're going to shut off everything. But if the default mode network is already shut off and the blood stops flowing into that box, I think the other connections are still going to be somewhat running. You know, that's a very crude estimate. And like I said, I'm not any sort of doctor or anything like that, but I'm wondering, it just gets me wondering, like, could it be, like, if this was true, could this be some sort of novel idea of helping stroke victims? Like, you know how they if you give a victim something right before they have a heart attack, it lessens the effects of it. Might psilocybin be that thing that if you can get someone in the midst of a heart attack, give them a shot of psilocybin, might that save their brain memories? Might that save the neuroplasticity? Might that save their ability to think later down the line?
It could do even more than that, you know, because we've talked about ionophores a little bit, but it increases the bioelectricity in the system as well. And you have you have neuronal tissue in your heart as well as your gut and there's other places in your body that all of this stuff is getting affected. You're not just getting neurogenesis in the brain, you're getting neurogenesis in the sense that neurons, novel connections between neuronal centers in the body even, can have some effect here. So I think when you weigh that into what we could possibly describe as a treatment, I think, you know, it's very much an open-ended question of, you know, what if, but I think there's great potential there. You know, and let's take it back just a couple steps and say anything that promotes neurogenesis, the actual physical growing of new neurons, right? New connections and new pathways in the brain and in the rest of the body, and the neuronal centers in the body. I mean, how fascinating is that? we've had pharmacology kicking around the bucket trying to figure out how to pass the blood-brain barrier for forever with all this stuff, and here we have this wonderful thing that grows on every continent on the planet that just does it like it was, part of part of a system, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about, and I it also blows my mind to hear people's stories who have been to the edge, and I it's it's interesting because he had told me that that guy died and he felt as if he has a second chance. Like most people who come close to death, or be it yourself that has an accident, or you lose a child or a loved one, or any sort of tragedy like that, you do end up coming out of it eventually, hopefully, with a new sense of self, like a renewed love or lust for life. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I got the second chance, and everything's a little shinier. The colors are a little brighter because you got so close to realizing the mortality that is life.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't find a new lease on life.
Yeah.
Typically. Um, yeah, but I also think that that's a bit of a nurture thing as well. Because our entire lives, people talk about death, people talk about afterlives, people talk about eternities, people talk about all this stuff, but nobody really has any solid answers for people. And unless you're truly heretical, you're going to be questioning all of this stuff at your last moments, right?
Yeah.
And so I think part of our relationship with death weighs heavily into that. Oh, I kind of like cheated death a little bit. I kind of got away from that. I get my new lease on life. So I think that plays a lot into it as well.
Yeah. I was trying to put a positive spin on it. Like there's so much pain that comes from that. However,
Oh yeah.
I think if you can understand, and it's tough to do in the beginning, but I think if you can understand that coming close to death, or having a near death experience, or even the biggest tragedies in your life, they end up being the greatest gift that you can have, because it's something that forces you to see not only your limitations, but also forces you to maybe develop the gifts that you want in life. And very rarely are you put in those. Anytime you're like, pressure makes diamonds. And if you find yourself in a situation where it's live or die and you escape death, then it only makes sense that the life you live should be a little shinier, should have a little more shine to it.
Right. And I think, there's something to be extracted into
Yeah.
just the daily lesson too.
Yeah.
I mean, in a bit of a sense of it, we die nightly. We go to sleep. We don't have
Mm,
any idea what happens when all that shuts off. We know stuff happens.
yeah.
Sometimes we come back with some weird imagery. Sometimes we come back with nothing. Sometimes we wake up sweating. Sometimes we wake up in other situations. And, so every day is kind of a similar instance to that. But because we've normalized the fact that we do wake up every morning when the sun comes up, or whenever we wake up, we kind of detach ourselves from that process a little bit. So I think there's something to extract when you can extract that into your life. I mean, obviously, you know circumstances are circumstances, right? But when you have the ability to and I think that's where kind of like gratitude comes from. When a lot of people start talking about gratitude from like a self-help perspective, or a religious perspective, or a spiritual perspective, I think that's where a lot of it is kind of born from, is realizing the small things to have gratitude for, right? It's not just that one instance. Those instances can be very powerful, like you said. And those are things that you can't buy, right? You can't go out and be like, I want a near-death experience. I mean, maybe you could someplace, but I wouldn't trust anybody, and it's kind of
Yeah.
sketchy. um, but so I think there's this is a interesting kind of, whenever you start talking about life and death, you're always going to get a lot of people upset, because grief is a real thing.
Yeah.
And anybody who's gone through grief knows what grief is, and if you haven't, you haven't. And it's one of those things where you can't help but change. I mean, there is no choice but to change who you are. And but to your point, that is the ultimate fuel for the fire, really.
So it drove me down this rabbit hole. Let me know if you think this is what you think about this. It seems to me that a lot of people, and all you need to do is go to the bookstore and look at the great writers or the self-help section, or look at some of the people that you admire in your life. And it seems to me that some of the most inspiring people on the planet have had horrible, and I mean horrible, things happen to them, like their kids dying or their loved one dying. And there seems to be this kiss of power that comes from sacrifice and death. And that made me think, like, it made me think back to like the Aztecs and some of these cults where people sacrifice their kids or they sacrifice their loved ones. If you believe, or if it's believed that those people who touch death by watching a loved one die come back stronger with a gift, might it make sense then that's why some of these cults, or that's why some of these ancient traditions killed innocent people, is because they wanted people to suffer so they could come back stronger?
I mean, I could see it. Why not, right? Humans go to all sorts of extremes to try to facilitate behaviors.
Right.
And I think if you built a whole system around that and a whole culture around that, then surely you could really influence a good number of people via that mechanism. So now, is that a good thing?
It's a horrible thing.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But all of a sudden, fast forward to today, and we're actually doing it again. I don't know if you heard this. A couple days back, some 23-year-old woman in Belgium decided to get euthanized. And apparently it's legal in Belgium. And so 23 years old, she had PTSD from some bombing incident. And so was just having a miserable time of things, but then decided that she just wanted to kill herself at 23, and doctors killed her. So we're nearly back to that same stage of things right now.
That's interesting. I mean, did she have some psychiatric evaluations, or, I mean,
she was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. So, and then it was just a voluntary choice, and I guess that's part of what you can do in Belgium.
And that's legal in Belgium?
Apparently.
So it's like assisted suicide.
Yeah.
I guess it's saying it's interesting to use those words, assisted suicide and euthanized, right? Because when I think of euthanized, I think of putting someone down. Yeah, exactly. But I don't know, man. I on one level, I feel like, your brain at 23, your brain's not even fully formed. I don't know if you should be able to do that. But on another level, I mean, it's your life, and should you be able to take it if you want to? I kind of think you should.
I think so. I mean,
yeah.
You're not beholden to anybody, really. I mean, it is your life, your experience. It's a tragic thing, though. Because I think there actually is, as we were just talking about, I think there's methods to unravel those things.
Yeah. And what does it say about people? I mean, what does it say about
an establishment?
Yeah. Like this person has no hope. They have nothing. They're just like, I'm out of here.
Well, right. And then for that to be supported. Because ultimately that's what that action is when you're talking assisted suicide. I mean, that's how many people had to sign on for that, right?
Yeah. I mean, on the flip side, I think I'm for assisted suicide later in life. I don't know about earlier in life, but if I'm for it later in life, why should it be any different earlier in life?
Well, I mean, I'm for people having a free choice.
Right.
However, I think there should be something to be said about kind of expelling available options, right?
Right.
Now, maybe the options weren't available there. Who knows? There's all sorts of different problems when you start talking about that. Yeah, it's nice and it sounds nice, but there's socioeconomic problems that, make it unfeasible sometimes, right?
Right.
Let alone political problems and all ideologies and all religious things and all sorts of different, shenanigans of humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I wonder if there's like, it would be interesting. It's kind of science fiction-y, but what if we could make a drug that would simulate death and you could take this drug and die, and then you could.
that's kind of what the psychedelic experience is.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it from the massive release of DMT in the brain.
Right. Yeah. It's like a hard reset.
Yeah, that's the experience that when death happens, that's what one would kind of experience. So then if you came back from that, that's coming back from death. And I think that's kind of where the ego death, kind of that parlance comes from.
Yeah. I was thinking about different drugs and different effects. And I know that sometimes on psychedelics, I'll have like a time dilation effect. Like I feel like I've lived, almost a different lifetime or I've at least lived out. It seems like I've lived a different lifetime. Like I've lived multiple lifetimes, or I've at least seen myself living in different situations, which seemed like it's a distortion of time. And so I was wondering if you could figure out how to isolate that particular experience and dilate time, like, wouldn't it be amazing if you could take a drug that slowed time down in your mind and you could study stuff during that time? Or, I'm sure it could be used for nefarious reasons, where if you took a drug and, 10 minutes seemed like 10 days, or 10 days seem like 100 years, then you could put people in prison in that way. Or in some ways, I think you can. I think if you take that, like there's a scopolamine, which makes you pretty much mute, like imagine being in that state where you're alive in your mind, but you can't even move, or you're like in a coma. That's kind of creepy.
Yeah, there's a lot of nefarious purposes and things like that. I think there was actually, what was that movie? Yeah, it was a remake, Judge Dredd. Did you ever see that?
Never have, no.
Well, they remade it for, I don't know, whatever, the umpteenth time. It was originally a comic book, but the drug that they were fighting against in that movie was exactly what you described, a drug that slowed down time. And so, like, their clever way to kill people in the movie was to pump a whole bunch of this drug into them and then push them off a building.
Oh, wow.
So for them, in the movie, it would be, forever. But at the end of the day, I mean, you really don't change the effects of physics. So,
right.
It was, it was Hollywood, of course. But
yeah.
I think back to the time dilation thing, I think there's a lot to be said about that. What really kind of got me interested into, searching down the physics realm and information theory that I eventually came up with and all that was my first mushroom experience. And I had never done anything up to I was like 24 years old, and my buddy was like, "Hey, you want to take some mushrooms?" I'm like, "You know what? Yeah, today I do." And so we ate about an eighth of mushrooms a piece, and then went to the club that we always went to. And I was doing some country line dancing at the time. I was pretty good.
Nice.
But all of a sudden, this kicks in, and I had the wildest experience because all of a sudden I knew what people were going to say before they said it. I knew what people were going to do as they walked around the corner. I knew what clothes they were wearing. I knew what they were going to say to me. I'm talking minutes before it actually happened. And I'm just like, sitting there, I'm like freaking out because I'd never done anything in my life besides just drink quite a bit up until that point. But, nothing like this. And I'm just sitting there like, I can see the future. Oh, shit. So, I wrote down some lottery numbers on my phone just in case it didn't work out. But, I guess I couldn't see that far in the future. But yeah, that whole night I knew everything that was going to happen before it happened. And so that kind of kicked me down the rabbit hole of all rabbit holes. And I've been on that rabbit hole journey for the past, 15 some years.
What an
So,
amazing experience to have a state of mind that you've never, like a novel state of mind. I think that that's something that psychedelics do is they present you with knowledge or ideas that you've never had before. And like it's so intoxicating to be in that position where you come upon information that's all around you, but you've never grasped before.
oh yeah, then the novel experience. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the underlying motivation for why we have this penchant for exploration, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you start thinking about it, you're exploring the inner self the same way you explore the land, and there's so much same terminology like, hey, I'm going to go on a trip, whether it's a vacation or you're taking some drugs, you're on a trip. And when you get high, you see stuff from different perspectives. So you're looking down at it the same way you can maybe look back on your life. You can look back on the trail that you're on if you're on a hike, and it's interesting to think how those two things, those two ways of exploring are so similar.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I love language and the
Yeah.
study of language and etymology and where all these things come from and how they've kind of, at least where we think they've come from and how they've evolved. And, uh, one of the ones that I really love is discover.
Mm.
People think about discover and they think that they found something novel. But the ancient Greek for discover is to uncover, meaning
Mm.
finding something that's already been found, right? So it's really interesting how these words kind of evolve, certainly, but it's also interesting kind of the implications that they had at different times in the world when they were used, and then how we use them now. And I think back to where we started, I think there is going to be a new logos that kind of emerges, and I think it is going to be this, it is going to be intent, and it's going to be movement, and it's going to be vibration, and it's going to be frequency driven, and it's going to be a deeper understanding of the world that exists around us. But the words of that intent, if you want to call them words, because they won't really be so much manifest as words at that point. They're going to be similar in aspect to how we describe things now. They're just going to be, because that's why we describe the trip and the exploration and the perspectives and the high and all of this stuff. It's because of similarity and shared experience. And so that'll continue just because of that, like etymological, chain of custody, if you will.
Yeah, I want to try to flesh that out a little more. Do you think it's like the development of like a sixth sense? Like we've always heard this term growing up. Oh, that person has a sixth sense. But
Well, we have a
maybe
lot more
that's,
than six, but
yeah, right. Like I don't think we probably don't even have the words to explain exactly what our senses are. But it does seem that there is this new evolution of communication that is more than words.
well, I think it's definitely been evolving. I mean, if you
Right.
look at just like photographs to video to, now we have all these memes and things like this. Talk about a picture that says 1,000 words. Some of those memes say 10,000,
Yeah.
right? So, I think, and then, we've talked a little bit about it before, but you have the things like Neuralink from the technological side of things coming down the pipe. I think, so I wrote this premise for what I deemed a sci-fi novel back in 2016, I think. I called it The Infinitum. And basically, there had been a cataclysm in society, and society had fractured into three segments. You have your basically genetically modified elites who kind of live in floating cities. You have your kind of cyborg, mechanistically modified human beings who kind of are the support staff for all of that. And then you have like the breakaway group of people who are, just old school humans. And I wrote it as a science fiction, but man, I could see that becoming science reality pretty easily with the direction that things are heading.
Yeah. If you look at every now and then on the news, you'll catch like there'll be like an article that talks about this tribe in the Amazon or this tribe off the island of South America. And it's always this indigenous tribe that people haven't really messed with because they live their lives and they don't bother anybody and they don't want anybody around. like those people are still living as hunters and gatherers. And if you read, if you read any of the stories of Atlantis, or even some of like the Homeric verses, like you hear about the barbarians and stuff, and it may, like, especially the stuff about Atlantis, like it makes me think that there was this elite class of technologically savvy people, and then this whole other class of people that didn't even know they exist, and like that structure still exists today. Like the people in the Amazon, while they may know of 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 different people in different parts of the world, they don't know what the culture is like, and they don't understand it, and they still live the way they've lived for probably 1,000 years. So,
Mhm.
in some ways, I think the story you're writing is the story. Maybe you're tapping into the story of the planet. Like maybe that's what happens.
Maybe. That's a really good point, though. I mean, you have places like North Senegal Island, right, where that one guy went and tried to spread some Christian
Yeah.
joy and took some arrows for it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, it is interesting that we still live in a world like that, with all this interconnectedness and all this, communication and videos and everywhere and cell phones in everybody's pocket. Except, then you get, and this is kind of an interesting statistic. So there's 2 billion people in this world that are unbanked.
Wow.
Yeah. And then you start to think about those numbers and you go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. 2 billion people unbanked. And then, so that's 2 billion people that kind of live outside of the global economy, right? And so when I think there is this massive gradient to society that, because of how we grew up in our surroundings, we're kind of really ignorant to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like in some ways, it's like the allegory of the cave. Like
Mm-hmm.
all we see, especially it's country specific, I think, in some ways, like, how can you, a lot of people believe what they see on TV is real, but those are just the shadows on the cave. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know who blew up a bridge in Ukraine. We don't know who blew up a pipeline. We don't even really know if one blew up. I mean, I don't know anybody over there. I just watch this. I don't even really watch TV, but I hear on the radio. How can you, like, the fact that I don't even have a TV, but I know that happened? Like, that's how much this imagery is being blasted out. Like, they want to make sure, I guess the people in situations of authority want everyone to see these images. And
Right.
if you just think about news that way, like everyone must look at this. I don't care what you think about it, but you must see this. And we're addicted to seeing it in some ways, and we thrive on it, and we go to work because of it, and we live our life around this narrative that is being thrust into us. But there's no way we know that we're being told this is happening, but that's all we know.
Might know a couple more things.
Okay, like what? What else do we know?
Well, I mean, I think we know that there's effective things. We know that the narrative doesn't work anymore. We know, we have tools and we have communications and we have networks and we have technology that we're building, and we, systems like a Bitcoin and things like this. Right. So I think we do have a little bit more than that. In the fledgling stages, for sure. I don't think, I think if, shit were to hit the fan tomorrow, we're pretty much, everybody's kind of, I'll see you on the other side.
Right. Right. Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, do you think that the world would not completely, but do you think people would just stop working? What would it take for people just to stop working? They're like, what? I'm not going to do this anymore. It's not worth it.
I mean, a lot of people don't have that luxury, right? Like, most people, because
Right.
Most people live in city centers, and city centers, unless you work, you can't afford to buy food. And if you can't afford to buy food, you're going to die pretty quick. Yeah. So, there's some intrinsic motivation, we'll call it that,
right,
that exists in city centers. But I think we've already started to see the beginning of it. We're seeing the exodus from these massive city centers. Um, COVID really kind of kicked off that in a hurry, in a frenzy. And it kind of died down because COVID died down, but we're still seeing it. You're seeing mass exoduses from places like in LA's and New
Right.
York's, and you're also seeing those places, crime go through the roof.
Right.
Just crazy crime. I mean, people getting shot up in Beverly Hills and all sorts of things that rewind 20 years, you would never think would ever be possible in this country.
Do you see us just spiraling to like a third world status where, really rich neighborhoods have private security guards and
Well,
there's kidnappings and
I think there's part of that's the intent.
mm,
I mean, look at the call on the liberal left of the United States to defund the police. They kind of changed their tune when they realized that, oh, this is really bad for our ability to get reelected. But there's supercuts of videos of dozens of them saying defund the police. We have to defund the police. We have to defund the police.
yeah.
Well, what that ends up, and I think the motivation behind that is exactly that. They want a privatized security system. Why? Because you're not beholden to voters. You're not beholden to regulations. You can, you have people to enforce, make my day laws essentially, right? And so I think there is a drive and a desire for all of security to be privatized, just like most industries have been driven private. We were a lot more socialistic back in the day.
Yeah.
And then a lot of that has become privatized, even our monetary system. So I think we're going to see a continued effort to push our security to a privatization as well.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening in California, in New York, and maybe Oregon, all like the really liberal states, is this rush to privatization. Privatized police force, privatized resources, privatized electricity, privatized water. Everything is going to be like a subscription.
Right. And
And
if you can't afford that, then you're going to be on the social credit system, the welfare system of the state, which is going to be driven by these central bank digital currencies.
yeah, what have you given any thought? Sometimes I hear this theory that the Fed is trying to fight the internet. It's like the national, like the Fed being pretty much the top banks in the US, even though those are subsidiaries of larger organizations. But I think it was Tom Luongo who was talking about the Fed trying to fight the international banking system. So by going with the higher rates, they're trying to push out the international people because the international banks are saying, "Look, we're just going to take over the U.S. We're going to suck you in, and we are going to put out this world digital currency." But the Fed is trying to fight them by putting up these higher interest rates, and the idea behind that is that eliminates the zombie corporations that have just been, shuffling money back and forth and selling stuff back. What you give any thought to that particular idea?
I highly disagree with that.
What
I
do you
think
think?
the Fed was founded, it's always been an extension of the International Monetary Fund. If you look at the wars that the United States and the conflicts the United States has been involved in, every single one didn't have a central banking system before we started the conflict and did after we ended it.
Right.
And I don't think that you just turn dime on that. More than likely, it seems that this movement of interest rates is to actually try to bankrupt other people, is to try to centralize more power. Because, like just look, Credit Suisse is trying to sell off hotels and stuff to make their bottom line right now. So you have Credit Suisse is about to go out of business and is about to default. So that's where they're trying to put the pressure. You put pressure on your competitors, and then you buy up on pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, real estate acquisition, and that pretty much fits the motif we were talking about privatization too. If you have places like San Francisco where the rent was 100 times the national average, and all of a sudden it's decrepit. There's like homeless people throwing doo-doo around. Those prices come way down. And then now you can buy stuff up for pennies on the dollar, put in a different harbor,
Kick
and
out the homeless people.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I heard, I heard these guys talking yesterday about, specifically, they were talking about the bridge that was blown up in the Ukraine or Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys had an interesting take. They had quoted a Kissinger quote that was escalate before de-escalation. And so their idea was that what we're seeing now is a planned escalation where it looks like we go to the brink of war, nuclear war, so that they can siphon out more money and then reconstruct everything. And these guys were saying that, what you're going to probably see is that I don't know if anybody follows George Webb, but he's a pretty good investigative journalist. And his take was that a few weeks ago in Italy, there was and he was actually there in Italy, and he took pictures of all these billionaires' yachts outside Italy and these mansions of Kolomoisky and the people that own the steel plant. I forgot the name, steel plant or something like that. And you had the leader of Ukraine, the president, he was there, and you had some oligarchs from Russia and some people there. And he's like, look, there's clearly high-level negotiations going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And he said this 2 weeks ago, that what happened there was the peace treaty. Like, the peace treaty's already been signed, and that you're going to see a run-up in escalation until it looks like, oh, no, there's no possible way we're going to war. And then comes the de-escalation. But in the midst of de-escalation comes this $5 trillion price tag to reconstruct everything. And since USA was sending all the bombs over there, now they're going to be responsible for reconstruction. And you're going to see all those old steel plants and everything over in Ukraine is like 150 years old. So basically what you're seeing is this planned this idea
insurance
of
fraud.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So let's blow it all up. We'll destroy it, blow it all up, and then we'll suck out all the money and rebuild it. We'll put some nice condos on the Baltic Sea. Everyone's going to get their brand new pipeline coming in. We're going to move it from here. Everyone's getting a cut.
I mean, I could see it. Look, people come up with some brazenly shitty ideas.
Yeah.
I would also cite that 2 world wars have showed us that maybe that's not a great idea.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it wouldn't absolutely surprise me, right? That being said, I don't think that that's the path where all of this is leading, personally.
What path do you see us on? Like, if you were looking into your crystal ball, what do you see?
Well, I think we're watching it, and we've been talking about it, the consolidation of powers and resources in control, the destabilization and destruction and degrading of nation states, and the rise of the technocracy. And I think there is a massive investment in terms of just the people who hold the most money in the world and what they spout from their mouth on stage. There's a huge investment in this future. And I think that we're going to continue to see, moves being made and people getting embroiled and all sorts of things. I mean, if you look, you don't get a lot of news out of China, but I have a couple places where I get some news out of China. And they're up shit creek in quite a few ways. And I've been talking about this for years in my inner circle of people, but they lied obtusely about their economic ability and status and earnings and revenues and all of this stuff for years and years and years and years and years. And because they tried to make a middle class, and they tried to build all these cities, and they tried all these huge construction projects, they funded all this money in all these foreign nations. But it was all kind of on we can actually do 60% of that, but we're promising 100%. And so that chicken's coming home to roost in a lot of instances right now. And so I think we're going to, most people think China is this big looming threat, and they could be, but I think more than likely they're going to pull a Soviet Union. And you're going to see an implosion, and then you're going to see, like a Tibet again. You're going to see a northern Mongolia. You're going to see Cambodia. You're going to, extensions there. You're going to see, some India pick up some real estate. because there is a lot of people who are very different ethnically and culturally.
Yeah, and I mean, if history is any sort of barometer, in the 80s, we were like, "Oh, Japan's gonna overtake us as the biggest
Mhm.
economy, man. We can't even compete with them." And lo and behold, they fell through the center just like the same way China is. And I think geography has a lot to do with it too. If you just
Sure.
blockaded, you just if, like I don't know if I can't
Yeah,
really
yeah,
see my map,
I
but if you
can.
just if you just blockaded China, might be on the wrong side there.
It's
If
on
you
the
just
wrong side. Yeah.
yeah, if you just blockaded China on one side, like you cut them off. Like they're geographically isolated by mountains and deserts, and then
Yeah.
they only get their stuff through the sea right there. That's why they have those islands in the South China Sea. But you could cut those off, even if they use their uh, aircraft carrying missiles or their submarines. You're still gonna cut them off long enough to starve them out. And they are in some way a paper tiger, right?
Yeah, I really think so. Now, don't get me wrong, paper tigers can still give you a hell of a paper cut. And, all it takes is one or two hypersonic missiles that actually work
Right.
with a nuclear warhead on it that hit, even close to a target. And
Yeah.
that kind of makes your point anyway, but it's not going to win you a war. And so I think from, just a logistical standpoint, they've been spending a lot of money and effort and stealing a lot of technology to try to build their military. Um, and they do, and I will say from like monitoring scientific papers, there is an uptick in, Chinese citizens who are releasing really quality papers out there and doing some really interesting research. And that wasn't the case, up until maybe 7 years ago. And so you have to imagine this is a very small time frame to get things right.
Right.
You've built some stuff, I'm sure, in your life, and you've done this podcast now for 200 some episodes. Iteration is just a magical thing that you really, it's just like experience. You can't buy it, you can't teach it. Just kind of one of those things that has to happen. And I don't think they've had enough time to iterate through their process to have an effective military system. Plus, they've never been challenged militarily since they've modernized, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It definitely brings to the foreground strategy, and in some ways it seems like their strategy it's not less evasive than the United States strategy for world domination, but it's it's not
Well,
as abusive, I guess, or as
well, it's not
aggressive.
it's not as direct.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, like when I was traveling Central and South America, I noticed towards the end of my travels that every hardware shop, every grocery store, every knickknack shop was all of a sudden owned by Chinese. And then you had a lot of places like Costa Rica. China donated police cars, helicopter, a prison slave labor force to build a new stadium, build bridges, and then lo and behold, these countries start signing free trade agreements with China. Now there's a Chinatown in downtown that's built. Now you have Chinese fishing vessels raping fishing waters, putting locals out of business and all sorts of other things. And you have like their Belt and Road project that's massive investment in all these countries from Africa to China. And then you have so they've been a bit more kind of obtuse about their approach, right? And they figured maybe we can just buy up everything. Except I think they're running out of money.
Yeah. Yeah, people are losing faith in their dollar or their
Yeah.
currency, the yuan. It's it's interesting. Yeah, it's almost like they have a little diaspora, like they just send their people out to go live in other places and then they slowly just kind of take it over.
Yeah, it was really interesting too, to start in a place and then all of a sudden fast forward 5-6 years and then you see just, you know, a downtown square that used to be, a nice, beautiful fountain with these huge trees and all this stuff, big old Chinese arch and then a Chinatown replaced it. And it's like, wow, that's a trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's on some level, it's interesting to see the world of mankind spread throughout the world. It's just like a different, you know, I, in Hawaii, we have like a lot of invasive species. I guess you could say white people are invasive species, or Chinese. You could say whatever people you want, but
If you
like,
go back far enough in time, everybody's a fucking invasive species.
I know. It's interesting how we grow all over the world, and sometimes in some seasons this plant grows, and some seasons this plant grows. It's fascinating to think about.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's interesting too how technology spreads within that as well. I remember, going down to these, people call them third world countries, but I'm on the beach and I see people, with a laptop.
Yeah.
And because Wi-Fi technology came around and you didn't have to wire everything through the jungle, now you can beam a signal. Now all of a sudden they got to skip a whole step of societal development, and everybody's got a cell phone on the beach. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I never, you never would have thought, right? But yeah, it was really interesting how technology kind of propagates through those life spores.
Yeah. On some level, I think that is another factor of what's happening with a lot of the billionaire class, and a lot of the managerial classes, and a lot of the wars that we see, is this really big push to not let smaller countries industrialize. It seems to me that when a country industrializes, they begin becoming self-sufficient, and that's the last thing people in positions of authority want. Or it seems to me like there is a ruling class throughout the world. I mean, just you have a king of England. Like there's people in our country that are multi-billionaires, and once you achieve that level of success, then success follows you, or even rides your coattails. But the majority of that kind of success comes from, you know exploiting entire nations. If you can exploit the currency, or exploit the population of another nation, you can steal all their wealth. And if you can keep people poor, you can continue to exploit them. And like you said, technology does allow these poor countries to skip steps. You can go to, like, I know some places in California, there's all these telephone poles. Then you go to other cities, there's no telephone poles because they got stuff underground. They got fiber optics. Well, there's no reason that those fiber optics couldn't be brought to some third world country and just boom, there you go. Or now you even have Starlink. You don't even need any of that stuff.
Yep.
So it's becoming easier and easier for third world countries to industrialize. So that means there has to be more and more famine and war for the people on top to continue to suppress them. You ever seen it from that angle, or what do you think?
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily just famine and war on the top.
Yeah.
I think it's all of this. And I think the ruling class historically has kept tabs on how they've lost. Right? They have a long history of recording and reflecting upon their losses. And I think what we're seeing is, in effect, mechanisms of control to eliminate the propensity for them to have another loss. Because if you think about it, if people are now in a welfare situation, let's just take what the World Economic Forum says on stage, right? People are going to be in a situation where they'll own nothing in life. You won't be allowed to have property, right? So now all of a sudden, those people, without having property, you can't really assemble. You can't have groups of people get together. You can't, you're just going to have people who are stuck in a social credit welfare system from these central bank digital currency, social credit type things that are going to be popping up in multiple countries and already have popped up in quite a few. And, I forgot where I was going. Damn it.
I think it was like the propensity to not lose anymore.
Right. And so what that allows them to do is then basically enact control, right? It's a control mechanism. So now, instead of you assembling and even talking to your friends, well, you were out past curfew last night, and if you don't come home, we're going to dock you 200 credits from your next credit payment from our central bank digital currency this month. Well, I can't afford that, man. I gotta pay my subsidized rent, and I have to pay, all these stuff. And so it allows, the removal of basically our First Amendment rights at a fundamental level that doesn't violate the First Amendment, right?
That's, I mean, that's, yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty nefarious if you look at it from that perspective. But I think it's not just that. I think there's a lot of other things in play, and just look at the response to that happened to COVID. You can't tell me that at least at some level that was not a dry run for what happens if we lock everybody up. And even if it wasn't, there was definitely somebody keeping notes.
Yeah.
And so I think, we're seeing a lot of these, and again, we talked about it before, experimenting on the whole human population.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of these things that 20 years ago are unfathomable. You would be laughed at, just about everybody would laugh at you and call you a conspiracy theorist. Or worse. But now you're still a conspiracy theorist, except people aren't laughing anymore. Because now a lot of people see the same shit.
Yeah, it's true. I was talking to my neighbor who, during the whole COVID stuff, I was telling him my idea of what was happening, and I had written a letter to my senator about the forced medical procedures and how I thought that was a huge mistake, and regardless of what's true and what's not true, it's unethical for anyone to force a medical procedure on people. And as soon as I wrote that letter to my senator, 2 weeks later, I got an audit from the IRS, and, I don't believe in coincidences. And so I was previously telling my neighbor about some theories and stuff. And he's like, man, I love you, George, but you're a bit of a conspiracy theorist. And this was 2 years ago. Today, he went to go visit some family in Utah. And he's like, you know what, George, maybe some of the stuff you were saying wasn't so crazy. And I started laughing. I'm like, look, I'm crazy. And I'm sure some of the stuff I say is out there. But I think here's what I think and here's why I think it. And so I think the idea is getting out to a lot of people that, the propaganda, the full-blown, full-court press of what you're supposed to think is losing some steam out there. And
they got so damn absurd with it.
Yeah, they really did.
I think that was, from, just if I was running the show, I'm not for sure, but if I was, why would you get so direct, so assertive, so absurd with what you're enacting and all of this stuff? And then you have these people go parrot crazy ideas on television.
Yeah.
They're wishy-washy on everything, and they say something different, a week later than 180-degree different from a week before. And you got all this stuff. It's like, well, whoever's running the show is an idiot. Either that or they're trying to pull like some secondary con, right?
Yeah.
It might seem a bit more likely. But yeah, it's wild to, and then you have, people believe in science. You got all this stuff, all these things that come out, and it's just like, it's so absurd that people go, look, I haven't really been paying attention. I haven't really watched all this. I kind of watched this. I've been voting and, whatever, but things are getting a little crazy.
Yeah.
Have you paid attention to this? Have you seen this? Maybe this guy George isn't that crazy. My buddy George in Hawaii told me about this stuff a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And and I think that's happening a lot. I think a lot of people are, just because of the extreme absurdity of the whole freaking shenanigans, I think that's why we're seeing a lot of people go, well, maybe not.
Yeah. I wonder that too. Sometimes I wonder, is it desperation that forces people to act or put out such crazy propaganda? Or is it the idea that Goebbels' idea of the bigger the lie, the more people believe it, Or is it this mix of let's just throw everything against the wall so no one will know anything?
I think there's probably going to be all three of those categories and a couple more, depending on who's propping up the propaganda.
Right.
I think there is a certain groups of people, not a single cabal, but groups of people that are kind of, have these multi-generational plots for things.
Right.
But I think that also runs headway into, what we know is the downfalls of nepotism and inbreeding and all this stuff, right? So now imagine, yes, you might have had some brilliant guy a couple hundred years ago who figured out this great plot, but he didn't know what the fuck the internet was going to be. Right. So now all of a sudden, fast forward 200 years and you got the inheritor of this plot. And we've already talked about the no struggle trust fund babies who, everything
Right.
entitled in life.
Right.
And now they inherited the problem.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, everybody's talking on the internet about me. I don't know what to do. Well, what do you act absurd?
Yeah.
And I've spent a little time around people like that, not much, but that is their go-to. Is whenever they feel inferior to whatever situation's happening, they just turn to absurdity. Whether that be, oh, you're all fired, or I'm going to buy this place, or you're going to hear from my daddy, or whatever,
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. You know, they just go to these absurd states that no rational other human would ever communicate as. Like, uh, and so I think now you have these kids who they are kids, especially mentally. These children who inherit these plots that they're supposed to enact, and all of a sudden they get feedback, they get pushback, they get people competing against them,
Right.
and you can't. And so you act absurdly. And how does that look from the other side looking in? I think it looks a little bit like this.
Yeah, they're all Fredos and no Michaels. They're all Fredo Corleone. I'm smart. I can do it. I can run the family.
Yep.
Right, but none of them can because whether it's John Kerry and his silly kid or Joe Biden and his silly kid, like, dude, they're a bunch of trust fund babies that have never gotten a fight in their life. Mom and dad gave them everything. They're just
Well, the
they
other part, you never struggle.
they
And we've
never
talked, we've
struggled.
talked, and
They
we've talked
never
so much
struggled.
about the importance of struggle.
Right, right.
Right now, imagine never struggling. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
It sounds nice on the surface, but that's what you get at the end of the day.
right, right. Like, look at Biden's son, man. Like, you know, on some level, like I can't imagine like how the only way like I could get away with what he's gotten away with is like if he's protected by like the three-letter agencies. He's protected by his dad. Like that guy's committed so many crimes against humanity and our country, and he's just kept up in a mansion and nothing happens to him. And
Yeah.
like it's so sad to me that the people I gotta think that some people that are protecting him are just have an incredible amount of guilt. Like, what am I doing? Like, how can you, as someone who is supposed to protect this country, protect that person?
Oh, I think you got a plenty of guilt.
Yeah,
I think you have to. I
yeah,
mean, at some level. Obviously, there's sociopaths and psychopaths,
sure,
but I think, by and large, I think, especially because a lot of those people they set out with good intentions.
absolutely,
Right. And I would
absolutely,
say the vast majority of those people, because that's not a path one chooses without noble and honorable intentions.
agreed.
Because it's very apparent how challenging and detrimental potentially of a path it can be. And so, I think there are a few hoorah people who really want to, kind of get to the top of the thing, and,
Sure.
and I unfortunately, I think that just happens across the board. It doesn't matter what it is, but I think it is a little bit less in those kind of lines of work.
Yeah, that's probably where you're getting all the leaks and stuff from. Is that you
Probably.
know, I would agree. I would think that the majority of people, especially Americans, they want to do good. I think that there's a vein of integrity that runs through all of Americans that we're built on this idea, even though it may be a bit naive, but this idea of fairness. Like we believe if you work hard, you can at least get your way to a better spot. You may not make it to the top, but if you work hard, you can get a better way of life. And at least
You
that
know,
was ingrained in my family.
it was for me too, but I woke up to a really different reality along the way.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people are these days too. I mean, if you look at the statistics and reports on Generation Z, and what they, what sort of things they're looking for, or millennials, right? Who they're not buying houses because they simply can't afford it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that opportunity that was promised, that promised opportunity in that motivational kind of "We Are America."
Right.
I think a lot of it is now noticeably not there for many people.
Yeah, that would explain the idea of quiet quitting, and I get it, man. I can see, you know, if you talk, when I look at how the world works and how much social engineering there is, everything has become about money or the appearance thereof money.
Mhm.
And it has allowed for this radical shift of, and maybe this is a growing pains for a country, or maybe this is what happens with capitalism, but it seems that there is no more social mobility. And when there's no social mobility, then there's really when there's no social mobility, you quickly get to, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work, because
Right.
you're not right. There's no social mobility. So why do it? And I think
Right.
yeah.
I think you're right. I think we are reaching a lot of that point, because there's the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah. It's a great
And
point.
damn, if that's not even more true today than it has been in the past when that saying was started. I mean, if you look at the top echelons of most companies, it's a long line of nepotism. If you look at like your Bezoses and Musks and everything, they didn't pull themselves up by the bootstraps. They had billionaire, rich, millionaire parents who financed every single flop and failure that they had along the way, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in education and all sorts of other extracurriculars. So in part, we've been sold a lie.
Right.
And I think a lot of people realize that they've been sold a lie. And I do think we're moving in a direction where, unless that nuance is changed, and it's kind of interesting because the gig economy and the whole social media and the internet and people being able to podcast and stuff like that is a little bit of a release valve of that. It is, it's kind of the resurgence of small business, if you think about it a little bit. More so in the spirit of what small business really started as in this country, I think. It wasn't the small business to get rich. It was the small business kind of filling the niche.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that, the way the world works, it seems every time it's like a balloon. Whenever you squeeze if you have a balloon and you squeeze it, a bubble comes out here, but you pop that one down and it comes out here, and that seems to be like a pretty good metaphor for life. Like, you can't keep life down. You can contain it to some degree, and you could farm it to some degree, but it has a sense of escaping, just like the frog in Jurassic Park, or it has a way of finding its way. And I think that's the spirit we talk about when we talk about resilience, or we talk about finding a way. And in some ways, like I said earlier, pressure makes diamonds. And the fact that we're talking about what's happening, the fact that we can see this sort of nepotistic royal family that has been built in the United States, like, all you need to do is start looking. Like, if you look at the people that get positions, whether it's on TV or even actors, all actors up in high positions of authority, like, there's usually a legacy there.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I was talking to my dad yesterday. When I was growing up, I didn't realize that there were certain farm schools for certain jobs. Like, you want to be a politician, you probably go to Georgetown.
Yep.
You're going to be a scientist, you're probably going to go to Harvard. Like, and how do you get into those schools? Well, you may, like, maybe if you're a genius at the age of 5, you might get noticed and get a scholarship or something. Maybe if you work super hard and you know someone, you could get in. But most people are going there already, or can donate a building or something. Their kids go there.
Yep.
So, it's almost like we have a somewhat of an aristocracy that's been born here in the United States.
Well, yeah, I mean, we just recreated what we broke away from eventually.
That's a great point.
To the degree that, we don't have an actual king, but look at our past couple presidents and how dictatorial they act. Might as well have a king, right?
Right. Well, how many Bushes? How many Clintons? How
right.
many?
And I was just about to bring up that point where you were talking about, we have these political families, and we have,
dynasties.
Dynasties, truly dynasties. And, it's just like, it's wildly absurd to think that these people have the best interest of everybody else in mind. It's fascinating to me. As soon as I started to see a bit through the veneer of the world, and then you look at politics all of a sudden with some uncovered eyes, you go, holy shit. Like, wow, these people are really up to no good. How can you possibly support this? I mean, it's like, wild and rampant. I'll never forget the one time I talked to this politician, talked to me. She was all having a good time, really was interested in like a cannabis thing I was helping with. She lost her election, comes in, says, hey, I lost, just wanted to come say hi. And I was like, oh, good to see you again. She's like, talked a little bit, and she's like, yeah. And I was like, well, are you going to run again? And she goes, yeah, well, I don't know. Somebody came and offered me $100,000 if I joined this party, and I kind of towed the line, but I wouldn't be able to kind of run for what I was trying to run for here. Well, fast forward 2 years, guess who won the election? Imagine that. And so it's like, yeah, those things happen, and then that's the way regulation gets moved forward. So, for instance, the reason she wasn't allowed to talk to anybody that she was talking to at that point was because she was big on the cannabis for the local people. Well, once she got into that position, now it's cannabis for all the regulators and all of these state policies and all of these things where it's a pay-to-play system that if, you're not a big company who has at least millions of dollars on the surface to pay to play the game, then you're out of the system. Whether that be explicitly you're not allowed to play because you can't afford the license, or just, kind of implicitly through the, you're at the back of the list every time somebody needs to get, samples checked. And so your delay is 5 times the delay of anybody else. So you're naturally just going to fall behind in the marketplace type idea. There's all these little nuances of those types of games that they can play that just kind of weed people out of the marketplace. Again, back to what we were talking about before, about, the United States making the moves with its currency to put people in a bad position where they're in a liquidated position, because now you can buy all that shit up at pennies on the dollar. It's the same game.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me, I think that you can make some noise when you vote on the down ticket. Like, you can make some noise with your local community. Like, you can vote in some people on the school board, or maybe your attorney general and stuff. But I think on a level of presidency, I think people are being conned. Like, first off, no one, like, we the people don't get to choose who runs. Like, so it's like this false choice that's put in front of us. Mm-hmm. And on some level, I think all this money that goes into election season is just like a giant smokescreen for people. Like, yeah, I like this guy. Yeah, no, I like that guy. They want you to be in it. Like, they want you to feel as if, like, hey, look, you should vote for Trump. No, you should vote for Biden. Like, the fact is, it doesn't matter, because your vote doesn't really matter when it comes to that level. Like, you think that that's not already ordained. Like, you can have whatever you want for dinner. Do you want orange carrots or purple carrots? Like, you don't really get a choice, man.
Right. It's not a choice.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a lesser of two evils. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And which isn't a real choice. And that's the other thing is our political system at scale. How can you have a system to elect people to represent 330 million people,
right,
stuck inside this capitalistic system that doesn't allow you to get your name out unless you spend millions of dollars? And then all of a sudden, now because of the way we shenanigan the game, you have all these PACs and all these other things, and now it's not just a game of millions of dollars; it's a game of tens of, or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars at the presidential level these days. Nobody can afford that game, right? No. Even if the best ideas, that's where they go to die. Yeah. Because the person with the best ideas isn't going to rise to the top. It's the person who represents the money the greatest rises to the top. And I would argue that very few times the best ideas in that person are going to be a congruent thing. They're probably more than likely going to be pretty opposite of one another.
Yeah, and then you start looking at, how much money, how much of Twitter does Saudi Arabia own? Like, what percentage?
I think it was like 13% or something like that.
Yeah. And so when you look at these giant corporations, they're owned by sovereign wealth funds and billionaires of other countries. And so these other interests, you can call them special interests, but I don't think that that's a fair enough assessment. I would say more like other countries and other dynasties and other people that want to extract wealth from the United States. They've just bought their way in. Like, okay, well, we own this now, and we think the policy of the United States should be to buy our oil all the time, even though you guys have oil. And we have bought our ticket, and that's what we want. And if you don't do it, we're going to fire everybody over here. Mm-hmm. And so, in a weird way, what I've seen, like, here's something I always wonder about. Like when I look at Finland, or I look at, Denmark, or some of these other countries, they have this sovereign wealth fund where they take the people's money and they invest it in different, right. And then that money that they have invested on behalf of the people comes back to the people in the form of a dividend or in the form of infrastructure. And, I thought to myself, well, how come we don't have a sovereign wealth fund? And I'm like, oh, we do. BlackRock is our sovereign wealth fund, but they don't share the money with the people. They take all of America's money, all your taxes, and then they invest it and do whatever they want, and they take it for them. And then next year, you guys pay more money to them, but you don't ever get a return on your money. Like that, all your tax money, everything that you make goes out of the country. And that's why there's no infrastructure here. That's why people have bad pipes. And that's why there's a lower standard of living forever. And there's an importation of migrant labor so that they can continue to drain the American worker forever and ever until there's nothing left. It's like a giant parasite.
Oh yeah. Well, and then, then they facilitate like the rise of China.
Yeah.
Everybody knew China was going to commit human rights acts. Everybody knew China was going to use slave labor.
Yeah.
But everybody was also willing to turn a blind eye because guess what? I could get something 5 cents on the dollar. And then, it didn't matter that was going to eliminate millions of jobs in the United States and Europe and other places like that. Everybody signed up because they're not representative of the people that they're supposed to represent. They're representing, the ability to make more money personally or at a group level. It's very, like you said, we have an aristocratic class of society, and they are inherently selfish.
It's interesting. I was reading this book called My Struggle a while back, and it's this book about World War II, written from this crazy guy. But it seems to me a lot of what was happening then is happening right now. And if you look at international finance, sucking everything out of a country and taking it for itself.
Oh, yeah.
It seems a lot. Well, it seems exactly the same thing that's happening now, man.
Yeah, and it's wild. And, the person who told that system to go suck it ended up as quite a bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, like, there's another book called It Can't Happen Here that was written shortly after that. And, it's just, we talk about the world not repeating, but rhyming on a helical level. And if you look at, if World War II was to be brought back around, but at a higher level, the United States could be that Germany. If Germany came back and, think about Germany that pulls itself out of the Weimar Republic, of their dollar being nothing, and forming this incredible army, out of necessity. Like, I could see the U.S. doing that. If you look at the way the propaganda came after 9/11 and how effective it was to bring the United States together, even as fractured as the United States seems now, with the right level of propaganda, the United States could be turned into a machine that would dominate any country on the planet. And we could do it with pretty much no money. We could retool all the factories. We could do the same thing we did back then, and we could become the world power that no one could ever touch.
Sure, but I don't think that's where this helical move takes us.
Right.
I think it's not I don't think it's a world war of nations. I think it's a world war to decide if we're going to be a one world system or not. I think that's what we're aiming to decide as a population.
Don't you think that that's what Germany was trying to do, though? Like, wasn't it nationalism versus globalism in that war?
Yeah, in a sense it was. Germany was taking the nationalist position. and they were trying to kick out the central bank. They told them no, and they went off on their own path. Obviously the war stuff. I'm speaking from the economic type perspective. And so yeah, they were trying to protect their nationalist system, and I think, but now we're seeing a different type of thing, because up until that point and still past that point, you still needed nations. Nations were the security blanket. They facilitated trade. They did these things that, now with the advent of computers and 50 years of working on computers and all of that technology that we've built, you don't need the infrastructure of nations to facilitate what we call society. By and large, it is already done by these NGOs, these international conglomerates, these massive, oil companies. Think about the infrastructure that they have. Yeah. It's by and large done on a privatized scale. So I think that's what we're going to see. I think the next World War, and it might not be bombs flying everywhere, World War, but I think we're already seeing the beginnings of it, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to argue that we're not. But I think we're testing do we still need nations, or are we a single world system? And there's another side test, and that is, who runs that world system? And, so I think there's quite a bit going on, but I think that is the natural kind of question that arises. Because you and I, we're talking, 1,200-1,600 miles apart or something like that. And, we could have people all across the world all talking at the same time. Why would we be dropping bombs on people?
Yeah.
It kind of starts to defy reason. And so I think we're moving to those questions.
Do you think that, large corporations and NGOs and special economic, NGOs and corporations are kind of like countries? They have their people, or they're like their employees.
They're like monarchies, really.
Yeah. They're authoritarian governments that can, my rules, or we'll kill you, or we'll get rid of you, or whatever. Yeah. And they're and like you said, you look at something like Facebook, who's incorporated in Ireland, so they don't pay any taxes, but they're still protected by the United States military if they want to take something over, or they have the power of Twitter to go in and to
they ran an Arab Spring off of Twitter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go in and destroy governments via social media, be it Facebook, and it's. So do you think that maybe these corporations and NGOs are trying to usurp the nation states?
I think indirectly, yes. And I'm sure in a few instances directly. Just because of actions that have been taken. Like, for instance, people are saying the Nord Stream pipeline had to be United States or Russia. There's a lot of billionaires with submarines, boys.
Yeah, I know.
Let's be real. And how many big giant yachts have been seized? How many people have some angst to get off their chests, right? So I think, we are kind of seeing indirectly and directly the challenging of the power structure. Because the question kind of naturally arises if all of a sudden I'm an Apple and I have $1 trillion in the bank, and the country I kind of originated from, they're in the whole $30 trillion. Who's performing better? Do I really, look at me, I've been able to connect the world. They're just fighting the world. So these, even if they're not talked about at a boardroom, there are perspectives that kind of arise simply because of the environments, the nuances of what's happening in the world. The resources that are being accumulated by these NGOs, these big tech companies. Not just raw resources either. Exactly to your point, like a Twitter that's able to arise in Arab Spring, simply from mass communication. What sort of power is that, right, in relation to what a nation is? Because, what a nation is, yes, a lot of people, if you study civics, you'll say it secures the rights of the people and all these other things, but a lot of people think about a nation as just a protection of our land, right? You know, it's the ability to run a military, and it's the ability to make trade deals and things like that to keep us all hunky dory and moving along as Americans. So I think that again is just because we are seeing these, you know, a Facebook in Ireland who doesn't pay taxes to the government, but I still have to pay taxes. You're seeing different questions being asked from, you know, the population level looking at this thing as well.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I when you say it like that, it makes me understand a lot of the grinding that's happening between ideas and businesses and governments and corporations and, you know, forecasting for the future and rights and all these things. Like it's this giant wheel that's just grinding against each other. It's fascinating to think about. And, you know,
Multiplicity of wheels in three-dimensional space.
right. Yeah, complexity, right? The idea that each little part makes another part move, and it's fascinating to think about. Yeah, I like what you said about oh, is it the USA or is it Russia? It's neither, dummy. Like that's a false choice, and like either way, that perspective gets you to lose.
Right.
You know, it's like
Right.
which one was it? It's like the 3-card Monty. Which one is it under right here? Is it probably this one or this one? It's under none of them, man. That's in the guy's hand. So I think that more and more people are seeing that. Like whatever the news is telling you, it's probably none of that. Like they're just presenting you two horrible options out there.
Right. Well, and you know, from their perspective, it's all about generating revenue. So it's all about getting clicks. So the editor's looking at, you know, 5 different headlines, and he goes, that one.
This one will work good.
Yeah, Russia did it, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, there's an absurdity to the whole thing. And I think the absurdity is kind of what allows us to unravel the complexity. Because if it gets to the point of absurd, you know, then it begs the natural questions of, okay, well, who's actually pulling strings there? Who's in charge? Who would let it to get to such a point of absurdity? If that whole system of structure is completely non-relevant to what I'm seeing in my reality in day-to-day life, now they've lost my trust. And that's what we're seeing, I think, by and large, is just a systemic loss of trust in, you know, the established systems of the past, whether that be the media or nation states, and I think even technocratic structures as well. You know, people get pissed off because you know, their iPhone battery is all of a sudden crapping out on them half as fast, you know, or 2 times as fast as it used to. Well, lo and behold, Apple gets sued for $2 billion because they were doing that, and Europe said bad, but they still did it in the United States because they didn't get sued there. You know, and so people see this thing like, I'm going to Android, right? But again, that's the false choice.
Yeah.
Is it Android or is it iPhone?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They're both these multinational conglomerates that really don't have your best interests, just as probably even less than your political systems have your best interest in mind.
I was listening to I forgot. There's a gosh, I wish I could remember the author's name. It might come to me, but he recently wrote a book on it was slightly about psychedelics, and like the company's name I think is called like FGP or something like that. And this guy was telling a story about integrating psychedelics, and for lack of a better word, they're like life coaches or something like this. And he told a story about, you know, he was working with Davos, and I guess Davos had like a psychedelic tent, and he was there. And on the website, they have like, you know, they work with like Goldman Sachs and Cisco and all these like really high-end people. And he told a story about how he got like some really high executive somewhere that he wanted this guy to donate money to this tribe in South America. So he pulled all these strings and, you know, reached out, used all his connections to get this guy and his kids to go down to South America and do this really authentic ayahuasca traditional place way up in the middle of the Amazon. They took a boat up there, and it was something that like most people would probably, you know, love to do, or it cost tons of money. But he was authentic, you know, and he really pulled all these strings to do this authentic thing. And so he takes the guy and his family down there, and they stay for like a week, and the guy does like 4 nights and has these incredible experiences. And then on the way out, they go for the ask, and they're like, look, you can see how this medicine is amazing. This tribe could continue to thrive, and we could solve all these problems in the rainforest for like $250,000, and it seems like you're doing pretty good at like 10 million a year. And the guy's like, well, let me think about it. And so he comes back, and the guy's like, I want to help these people. That experience was magic, but I'd also like to buy this Lamborghini, and I've always wanted a Lamborghini. And so he buys the Lamborghini, and the guy that wrote the book tells the story about how he's down and out, and like, I'm never going to trust business again, and all these people. And, I reached out to the guy because I wanted to talk to him and his people about it. And as I read part of the book, and as I listened to more of his stories, it just got me thinking, like, on some level, like, we all lie to ourselves, and in this particular story, like, this guy's talking about how psychedelics are done for, it's already over, and that, it's going to collapse, and it's not doing what it's supposed to. But then I started thinking, like, dude, you're at Davos, man. Like, you're working with Cisco. You're working with the wrong people.
The belly of the beast.
Like,
you went to the belly of the beast.
Yeah, of course those people are going to not care about it. Like, and like, it just made me, I reached out to him because I wanted to talk to him. And he seems so distraught about the people and psychedelics. But then on their website, they're targeting the very people that are the wrong people. So then I'm like, maybe that's their gig. Maybe that's their shtick, is like, he comes in here and he's like, oh yeah, this is bad. I'm just going to help these world leaders or these people at Davos that have all maybe he's just draining money from those people or something. But I forgot how I got on that tangent, but
I forgot too. But, people like that get dejected by the business world all the time.
Yeah.
I've done the VC thing. I've raised money for businesses before, and it's 95% rejection. And it's a little bit better these days. It used to be like, imagine Shark Tank, but times 10 in terms of rudeness.
Right.
And now it's a little bit better, but still, that's generally what happens. Most of these people can't see an idea. Right, you have to sell them an idea. It has to be a story. It has to sell them. And even when they see the story, like the ayahuasca guy, it's all about timing. And if it's not the right time because the dude wants a Lamborghini, guess what? He's buying the Lamborghini every single time before he's giving you that investment money. Every single time. It's just how when people have a lot of money like that, especially when you're talking like the VC and business world money and getting money in that way, the ability to kind of be philanthropic, to remove some to have some sort of purpose, some greater ideal, really kind of goes out the wayside until they've now conquered their business dreams, go off and have this maybe an ayahuasca experience or something like that, and then they decide that they want to change the world, or you divorce Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I often wonder, you can't serve two. It seems like you can't serve two masters. Like, you can either be a billionaire, or you can have a family and have a somewhat normal life. But I don't think you can have both. I don't think you can be at the top of any field and stay there if you don't compromise other parts of your life.
I would agree. I think, just we have a lot of examples, I think.
Yeah.
If we were to really kind of dissect it. People who are extremely dedicated to a single cause, whether that be, achieving Olympic gold or, becoming a world champion and whatever, those people often, they're very good at achieving that. And then they're very bad at achieving anything else in life, because there is nothing else in life. If they're being honest with themselves, everything else is a distraction. Right. Look at Tom Brady, right? He should be the happiest guy in the world. He's the best football player that's ever walked on the fucking planet. Yeah. But yet his wife is taking a hike because, he's never around and he wanted to go play another season of football.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. I think one can only serve a single master, and I think it's interesting because I think what a lot of ancient texts and a lot of religious texts kind of allude to, but don't directly say, especially when you're taking the ones that aren't included in things found like the Book of Thomas and Book of
Yeah.
Enoch and things like
Yeah.
this. I think a lot of this comes down to that personal master. It's understanding and know thyself, right? It's being able to find all of that internally, and then I think when you find that, I think you can have those relationships, but you also lose the ability to go headlong down that path because it's not a balanced path.
Yeah. Yeah. The middle road seems
Right.
to be the best road. It's maybe not as many highs, not as many, but there's not as many lows. But I mean, you can experience. Sometimes I think that you get to experience. You can experience everything, just not all at once.
Right.
You can have your
Well,
20s to.
balance doesn't mean you're always going to be walking on a flat surface, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Balance
a good
means
point.
sometimes you're going to be at the top of the peak, and sometimes you're going to be down in the creek.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a pretty beautiful view no matter where you are if you're willing to stop and look around, right?
If you have the right proper perspective.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, man. So, yeah, I don't. What else you got, man? What else has been going on in your world?
Oh man, I had a wonderful hike today.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I did about 7 miles, three and a
nice.
half miles just straight up. It was about 1,500 vertical feet. I think I'm going to feel it tomorrow, but it was a good one. Colorado's starting to get cold, so I'm trying to pack them in while I can. We don't have the 80, 84 degrees all day, every day like you over there.
Yeah, well, it's starting to get a little darker earlier over here, but
What's When I was in Costa Rica, that was pretty well. Ecuador is right on the equator, so I didn't see
right.
much change. It's set 4:30 every single day. What
Mm.
sort of change throughout the day do you see? Like 45 minutes throughout the year?
Yeah, maybe an hour and 20 minutes or something like that. Like it's
Yeah.
dark now at like 6:50 or so, and then in the middle of summer it'll probably be like 7:50 maybe at the
Mm-hmm.
height. So not too much.
Right on. Have you ever been
Yeah.
to the northern latitudes or the southern latitudes?
I went to Sweden when I spent some time with a foreign exchange program over there, and it was interesting because I landed, it was like a 17-hour flight from California. And
Yeah.
I landed and I woke up in the middle of the night and the sun was out. And I'm like, dude, whoa, what time is it? I was all disoriented. And
Mm-hmm.
I look at the clock and it said like 2. And I'm like, it's already 2 p.m. And I
Yeah,
went
right.
out and
Oh my
like,
God, I slept for forever.
yeah, everyone's sleeping. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then I looked again and it was like 2 a.m. And I'm like, what? The sun is up, it's 2 a.m. So yeah, I've seen that aspect of it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, but sometimes people think the Earth can still be flat.
Yeah.
It kills me.
Yeah.
When that first came around, it was like what 2007 ish, 2006 ish, and I was like, oh, surely this has to be a joke, right? Like this is
Right.
just people like trolling the internet. Like nobody actually takes this. Oh, there's a lot of holy shit. There's a lot of people who take this seriously. Like, oh my goodness, this is heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's my friend, let's see. Oh, this is the guy that I was telling you about a little bit earlier.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I can do this real fast. So I am going to send this little message right over here to this one here. Oh, I don't know. I can't do it on my phone. Let's see if I went like this. Okay. This is probably a horrible idea. Okay. All right. Hey, Griggs, if you're there, tap on that link and it'll bring you in here, man. And anybody who's in the chat, tap on that link. Come on in. Let's see
I
what
was
you got.
actually going to mention this. So I was watching a stand-up comedian who was doing a live show the other day, and he just threw out his StreamYard link in there for people to come ask him questions.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so he would just pull in people to the broadcast and then just kick them out after they started to ramble, right? Well, which I thought, I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty cool idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll open it up to everybody.
Yeah, why not?
Why not make it a little bit more dynamic? Who do you think the first person is going to be to come in here?
Oh, I don't know.
Nobody.
It'll probably be one, like a family member or somebody of ours or something.
Right?
Like, I'm just trying to embarrass you.
It is a good idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. What was the comedian that you saw do it?
Josh Wolf.
Josh Wolf. Was he pretty funny?
He's a funny dude. If you haven't seen Josh Wolf's comedy, yeah, that's a good treat.
I'm going to check it out. That sounds pretty cool.
He's a funny dude. Is an entertaining dude. Like his last special, he did a whole lot of stuff with like a guitar and some comedy songs and just like back and forth with audience members, and it was entertaining, highly entertaining.
Yeah, that's something that seems to thrive in dark times is comedy.
Yeah, well, yeah, comedy, music, arts in general.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Oh, my buddy's got crappy Wi-Fi, so. Yeah.
That's always something.
Yeah. It's amazing to think of. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not sure where we're going to, but it seems like I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of propaganda, and I feel like we're not, even though it seems we're in dark times, I'm not sure. Like I get this underlying feeling of everything's going to be all right.
I think everything's going to be just fine.
Yeah.
But that's not going to be for everybody.
That's a good point. It's a good point. What do you think? There's going to be another bout of COVID coming around here this particular winter time?
I mean, I think a couple countries have already announced lockdowns. So
have they really? Who else?
Yeah.
Who's announced?
Oh gosh, like preemptively, it was a couple socialist type countries. Might have been, and it might not have been like nationwide. I think it might have just been for big city centers and stuff like around Christmas type things. Yeah, I can't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah,
but I think we'll definitely. Once a virus is out in the wild like that, it's kind of like a flu virus. It's going to just continue to mutate. And this one seems to have a penchant for mutating even faster than a flu virus. So I think, though, typically what happens with a virus in the wild, this is just typically, right, is it mutates to the point of kind of like a balance between being, infective enough, and then, but also not destructive enough that it is deleterious to the host, because its goal is to try to propagate as much as it can, right, and so it evolves to kind of a homogeneous state, kind of like a flu, where it's just like it doesn't really kill that many people kind of adjust to it as long as the virus is allowed to kind of survive in the body, which is, I don't know. So I think we'll definitely continue to see COVID. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And I think there's obviously an economic incentive in terms of tens of billions of dollars to keep jabbing people with, whatever they call a vaccine these days.
Yeah, it's true. I wonder if, like, we spend so much time making weapons and researching like viruses and stuff and using biological warfare. I'm wondering, like, wouldn't it be better if we spent our time like creating a virus that made everybody smarter? Like we could probably do that. Like if we can make weapons, can't we make a virus that would like make everybody a little bit healthier, a little bit stronger?
Well, I think to answer your question, maybe. But you have to also look at all the other factors there. If everybody all of a sudden starts to get smarter, well, they're going to want a larger piece of the pie, because now they're all smarter and they can see that they deserve a larger piece of the pie, that there isn't scarcity, that there actually is a little bit of abundance kicking around. So I think that the incentives don't really align for them to do that. But in that vein, I did read the other day that they're using CRISPR to, they made a drug. I'm not sure if it was injectable or you swallow it, but it was made with CRISPR to attack the HIV virus. And so the idea is it's not actually editing the human genome, it's going in and editing the HIV genome and not allowing it to propagate properly. So
that's a novel way of killing off disease.
Right. So now if you imagine that, if we could genetically modify diseases through CRISPR injections. Um, Gosh, imagine what that does for life expectancy.
Yeah.
Right.
You could do it for cancers. If you had you could test the cancer for its genetics and then come up with a CRISPR type of,
And CRISPR's one of those things where you can program it pretty.
yeah.
I mean, now it's been done so long, you can program it pretty easily. I mean, so we're getting to the point of genetic modifications on humans,
Yeah.
and I mean, we already there. We talked about the China stuff and things like
Right.
that, but
Right.
I think it's the mainstream aspects of it, because all of a sudden, it's going to be the easy sell first. It's going to be, well, you don't want your baby to suffer from MS.
Right.
We can fix that. All it takes is for you to just get this one single injection, because that's what they are. They're one-time injections, because you're changing genetic expression.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to think about, it's interesting to think about how certain types of injections may not only infect the very person that was injected, but may infect the children of that person. We may see some long-term ramifications of what's happened in the future.
Now I'm seeing more and more studies. The first one I ever saw was a rat study where, they would take a rat and expose it to some fear stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that rat, they would have offspring, and they would expose that offspring to a fear stimulus. And they even went so far as to have 2 sets of offspring before they reintroduced the fear stimulus. And so like 2 generations down. And they found that even 2 generations down, there was still a fear response to, it was an Oculus thing, right? Like,
right.
It was like a red rubber, ducky or something that
right.
the rat wouldn't have a response to normally, and other rats don't. But because they scared one rat with it, that is transmitted genetically through, probably the epigenome is kind of the suspicion, I believe. And so now we're getting more evidence for genetic memory.
Do you think that has something to do with like authoritarian regimes? Do you think that if generations are exposed to authoritarian leadership for 3 generations, then they just come to accept it as that's how life is?
I could, yeah. I mean, if we factor in genetic memory, and then we look at other things like a Stockholm syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I could certainly see where those kind of would play off of each other in some sort of mutually beneficial symbiotic way.
All right. Whoa, the man, the myth, the legend.
I had to move around the house. My Wi-Fi is terrible, so we might get cut off. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you a great friend of mine. Rich Griggs has had God, this guy's got so many cool. He's such a cool person, but recently he's had a life-changing event, man.
Interesting journey.
Oh, without a doubt, man. Why don't we? I was telling people a little bit earlier how you and I have done some pretty large doses of mushrooms before.
From what I hear, I think I can't find another person that has. Trust me, I've looked.
I think.
And, I don't
know.
You
found another one. You found another one.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I'm stoked.
Yeah, I think that this community, I've been speaking to some people like you and I. However, I think in our community, like you and I have had this talk many times, it seems that we're alone in the, over 10 gram range right there.
For sure.
For sure.
I would say, from my experience, it seems like everybody's about around an 8, maybe 3-4 grams. And you hear these incredible stories remember we were talking, these incredible stories at 3 to 4 grams, and you're kind of like, okay, but to each his own, right? I mean, everybody's brain's wired differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, but yeah, it's interesting.
It's fascinating, man. Can you tell us what happened, man? Like, so you had a crazy experience, man. Are you ready to share that experience?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. I would love it, man. Let's start off wherever you want to start off.
Well, I don't remember too much about that day other than I went on maybe 10.5 grams of the albino penis envies. And after that, I really don't remember anything else. I guess maybe I went to sleep. Long story short, ended up with cardiac arrest, dying over like 40 something minutes at a time, overtime, heart pumped about 10. And I told you about what my visions were during that 5.5 day coma. You know, it was real psychedelic, real, I don't even still know how to process it, but I just remember my brain was firing and functioning, which I remember we were talking about. I think it had to do maybe with the psychedelics because my brain was fully operational. Like I shouldn't be functionable right now if we go off of data, right? I should have some sort of mental or physical. I'm still trying to process it why I don't, but I do believe that the taking mushrooms that night had something to do with it. Because remember, I told you my visions, right? I'm in a dark room. There's these jesters laughing at me, and there's these cartoon characters, and I can hear things, but I can't see the things I'm hearing, but the things I'm seeing are, remember the jesters and elves, and they're like laughing at me, and they're like taunting me, and
take us from the point where, like, you had mentioned to me that you went, like, you woke up, cardiac arrest, you lose your sense of everything, and you thought someone had kidnapped you. Take us from that point.
Well,
there.
So initially, from what I remember, I'm in a dark room with my ankles and my arms tied in a blacked out room with these crazy psychedelic visions of jesters and elves laughing at me. And because I could hear people talking in normal conversation, I thought I literally was kidnapped and they were experimenting on me. Because I was like, last thing I remember, I'm in my house. Mm-hmm. And next thing I know, I'm being taunted by these visions. And I was like, it didn't make sense. And I guess this is the time I'm in the coma. I'm going through all this stuff, but I have no recollection of any of it. But my brain is functioning where I'm like, it's still hard to kind of explain, but like I hear the normal world, which is, I guess, maybe the dimension we're in, but I'm in a totally different dimension. I don't know if that makes any sense. Maybe I'm in the middle of both. Yeah. But I know, I mean, even 5.5 days coming out of the coma, I still was tripping literally. I had tracers, still had wild visions, and I've done 10 grams before. I've done it multiple times. I mean, we've even done 12, 14 was the highest I think we went. So I thought in my head, the 10 grams is a ride we've done before. Nothing too crazy, but in this instance, that event happened.
How long were you physically dead for?
They said a total of like 40 something minutes.
Is that on and off? Like
on and off, yeah, because I guess they had to pump my heart about 10 times.
Man.
Wow. So you go from being dead to alive, and then dead again and alive. And remember, I told you my wife said I took my last breath initially, and then flatlined, and then I think they said normally they'll stop around 7, but they ended up doing 10 to my heart. And I guess then when I did finally come through, I guess they put me in that medically induced coma. But in my thinking, I went from taking the mushrooms, somehow being in my bed, and then somehow I'm in this dark room, which made me think, yeah, I was like, and then it didn't make sense. Like I kept trying to process, like, why would someone do this to me? Why would I be going through this? Why am I being? There's a lot of why. But the first thing that went in my mind was someone kidnapped me and is. I mean, it sounds ridiculous when I say it now.
Not really. I mean,
I don't think it sounds that ridiculous. I think you were picking up on a little bit of both worlds.
Well, I think I told George, I said, whether you're spiritual, either religiously or whatever, like there is something going on in this interdimensional world we live in. Like, I mean, I always knew there was, but this fully convinced me of it. Yeah, things that are happening in my vision were coinciding with the things going on in the real world. Mm-hmm. like simultaneously. It was wild.
Right. You have 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
1 foot in, 1 foot out. And like I said, I could hear the world that we're in now, but I was in somewhere else. And
So,
all I can think of is, I thought about it a lot. I was like, man, it had to have been my brain functioning off of that, that world, because had I not done it, would I be in a different situation now? I kind of feel I would be.
I think so. We came up with a hypothesis, just from, are you familiar with the neurogenesis aspects of mushrooms? How it's forming new neurons in the brain and
yeah,
in the body.
Slightly, but not to the entirety that you guys know about it.
Well, so the idea would be if you went on this journey, you formed a whole bunch of novel neurons and connections and all the. Oh, did we lose him?
Yeah, he'll probably be back.
All right.
But yeah, he's probably still listening for it. So maybe you can explain it back. Keep explaining.
Yeah. So all of the neuronal connections that you made during that experience would still be active and would still be real physical actual connections in your brain and in your heart tissue and in your stomach neuronal center. So the idea of when you're dying and going out and coming back in, the normal attrition that one would normally get on the brain, right? Mm-hmm. There's only so many connections one would have, but you had a whole set of other connections that allowed you to kind of, weather the storm a little bit better. So
exactly. That's exactly how I kind of figured it would be. Like, there was things plugged in that normally aren't plugged in, but because of that experience, everything was plugged in. And I mean, it was one of those, the stars are aligned kind of deal. Like, it's not something we normally do, is take those huge doses. I think our average is what we do, 4 or 5 grams all the time, just for kind of, it sounds funny, kind of for shits and giggles. But this time, it was, I felt like totally like everything was plugged in.
Yeah.
That normally isn't plugged in.
And I think kind of what happened is, when the human body dies, typically there's a massive release of DMT, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what I think is like the DMT kind of took you into those pathways, and you were 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You were kind of experiencing a bit of synesthesia almost, where you were kind of the sensory information of the outside world was there and it was penetrating in, but you had another foot in this other world over here, kind of the DMT world that was and putting you into those novel connections from the psilocybin trip the previous night.
No, that makes total sense, because it was like I was literally in 2 different worlds, a foot in, foot out, and I kept thinking, like, if I wasn't plugged in, as you said, I think things would be totally different.
Yeah, you would have. I think that the idea of the brain not getting oxygen or blood for like 5 minutes is usually when you begin to see some pretty profound brain damage.
And that's what I looked up as. Like, I feel that I'm fully back to where I was mentally, especially mentally. I don't really have nothing, and that's kind of shocking in itself, because
it is.
Everything you read and everything you've looked up, I should be way worse off than I am.
Yeah, you should. Well, technically, you should be a vegetable by all of the medical literature. Yeah.
That's what the doctors told you too, right?
The doctor said that right off the bat. He's like 1 in 1,000, and I'm like, and that's kind of heavy to deal with. But I was like, I am appreciative that I have been enlightened to this type of activities in the past, where, like, it was like, I told you, George, it was wild. Hundreds of these. Isn't there those that I just realized it kind of now, those DMT elves everybody talks about?
Yeah.
And basically, remember I told you there were elves, there were court jesters,
right.
They were Disney characters, there were hundreds of them, and they were specifically like taunting me and communicating with me. It wasn't like I was watching a movie, it was like I was in the movie. Mm-hmm. And it was like, it got so intense where I had to close my eyes to try to avoid them, but nothing I could do to avoid them. It was like thrusting me in my face, like, you're gonna deal with this, you know. And now that
Yeah.
I think now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking about it. Maybe that was the whole point of it. Is like, don't shut off, because I wanted it to go away.
Right.
It was overwhelming. It was like, please go away, please stop. I don't want these experiments done on me. Leave me alone. But maybe that's the process I had to go through in order to be where I am today, mentally.
Maybe if you would have went away, you would
Because
have
I
died.
did. I was like almost like begging to stop. Please stop. I don't want to see this anymore. But then maybe that's what kept me alive and kept me going.
Very well could have been.
Stay here. They're throwing stuff at you. You know, whatever they can to
And I
keep
didn't
you
really,
here.
and not until talking about it now with you guys that I realized that maybe that's what it was. It was like, because it was literally being forced upon me. And most times when we do these psychedelic journeys, you welcome whatever comes from it. But at this point, it was so overwhelming, and it was so like deliberately toward me. Like I say, I wasn't watching a movie with funny pictures. I was in this movie with funny pictures.
Right.
And then I didn't put it one and one together like the DMT elf thing, because I totally seen these elf-like people and these, you know, like on a deck of cards with the gestures with the bells on their hats and shit like that. And like they're like throwing shit at me. Every time I try to block them away and close my eyes, they're like throwing this shit back in my face to keep me like, shit, dude. I just realized that now. That's exactly what the fuck was going on. Because I tried my best to block it out. I tried. I was like,
yeah, I think that was your inner self staying alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I do too. I got a heart out, guys. Greg's got to come back on. Greg's gonna come on for a couple of shows, and we're gonna get into the meat of this, man.
Yeah,
my wife and my daughter smacking me around over here, and they're like, "Dude, if you don't get off right now, I'm gonna punch you in the face, George." So
punch him.
Don't provoke them. They'll do
it. We'll do a full sit down and all that, and then
absolutely.
And I'll be able to process a little bit more, because I think I've just realized some shit just now about, you know, I've been trying to find out, you know, like, and then the whole thing. Remember, why me? Why this? Why that? Why? Maybe I should just get away from the why and just figure out the how. And
well, I think just talking to people is gonna help process that.
It'll get you to the why.
Yeah,
it'll help.
Yeah.
It will, man. So we'll schedule. You're off all week, right?
I'm off for the next year.
All right, I'll shoot you a text here in a little bit, and we'll schedule some stuff and we'll get it done, and we can have Ben come on and maybe some people, other, you know, depending on if you want other people there or whatever. So
no, I've been watching you guys for a while, and it's super interesting. So you know, I'll just jump in and see what's going on.
You're one of us, bro. You fit perfect, man.
All right.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, man. Happy you came out the other side too.
Yeah,
thank you. And we'll get deep in this.
Yeah, we will. All right, guys. Hey, I thank you both very much for cruising, and we'll touch base with everybody real soon on a couple days, and we'll have our Sunday show going on, and get ready for Greg's story. Ben, thank you very much for spending time with us, and we'll check everybody coming up here in the next couple of days, man. Aloha.
All right. Aloha.
See you later.
Nice.